Hey guys, let's talk about number 6 on the 2021 AP Chemistry first response question. Based on what I see here, guys, the student is studying up properties of calcium sulfate and lead sulfate. The student has a sample of both compound, which are white powders. The question is asking, um, the student tests the electrical conductivity of each solid and observed that neither solids conduct electricity. Describe the structure of the solids and that account for the inability to conduct electricity. So as an ionic compound, as you know, the ions are fixed, okay, in their specific position. That's what we call lattice, okay? So in order to be conductive, they have to be able to have a mobile charge particles, okay? So as a fixed charged ions, they will not be able to be conductive. So only time the ionic compounds are conductive is when they're in a molten phase, which means they're liquid phase, they can move around, or even what? Aqueous phase of the ionic compound. So as a solid, because they're fixed in position, they are not able to be conductive. That's part A. In part B, the question is asking which compounds is more soluble in water? Is it calcium sulfate or less sulfate? So there they mentioned something about, something about conductivity. So they mentioned that conductivity of a solution in the beaker containing calcium sulfate is higher. So higher or greater conductivity. So how do you have a greater conductivity? It means there's a greater amount of ions, okay? So which means it means that what? There's a higher ion concentration. So that means because calcium sulfate has a greater conductivity, it means calcium sulfate has a greater ionic concentration or ion concentration overall. So how do they have more ions? Because why? Calcium sulfate has a greater solubility. It dissolves better or dissociates better than lead sulfate. Probably will have greater K value as well, KSP value. So higher conductivity means greater concentration of the ions. Since calcium sulfate has a greater conductivity, means it has more calcium 2 plus sulfate ion compared to lead 2 plus and SO4 2 minus for lead sulfate. Part C, so based on the diagram, guys, so lower conductivity solution probably should have a less number of ions. So basically in my drawing, I put less ionic particles there as a solution perspective. So there's less Pb2 plus and less SO4 2 minus compared to calcium sulfate. So you have to draw drawing something like this. I mean, my drawing is not the best, but what's most important thing is you have to draw less number of ions in a solution compared to the calcium sulfate. So calcium has three positive charges and three minus charges. So basically, I drew a little less than that, two positive and two minus charge particles. So in part D, the question is asking a student attempt to increase the solubility of calcium sulfate by adding 10 milliliters of a 2 molar solution of a strong acid, sulfuric acid, to the beaker and observe the additional precipitate form. So that's kind of going the other way than what they wanted, right? So they would like to increase solubility. So what is solubility? Solubility is what? Amount of the salt or the amount of salt here, copper sulfate. However, how much of the copper sulfate dissolves in a given amount of volume of the solution or water. So that's what we call solubility, okay? So if, for example, like 1 mole of copper sulfate dissolves in 1 liter of the water, then yeah, that becomes what 1 molar solution or 1 molarity of copper sulfate is what we call solubility. So, um, but now they would like to increase that, which means they would like to push the reaction forward. So basically they're asking, okay, so to do that, they added more sulfate. Because again, H2SO4 being a strong acid, I mean, it will try to create more SO4 2 minus. But as we all know, in that case, what SO4 2 minus becomes what we call a common ion of copper sulfate and sulfuric acid. So initially, this might have been an equilibrium. By having more SO4 to minus, now what happens is Q becomes greater than K value. And we all know that when Q becomes more than K value, the reaction will shift reverse until Q becomes equal to K value. So which means because the reaction shifts reverse, it starts to produce more copper sulfate, which reduces its solubility. So yeah, that's basically what it is. This is basically a common ion effect question. So that will be concluding number 6 review on 2021 AP Chemistry.